The dusty town of Millbrook stretched along the railroad tracks like a brown ribbon under the blazing Texas sun. Sarah Mitchell stepped off the afternoon train, her worn leather suitcase heavy in her trembling hand. The year was 1887, and women traveling alone were as rare as honest poker games in these frontier towns. She had sold everything she owned back in St. Louis to buy this train ticket and start fresh somewhere nobody knew her story. Sarah's dark hair was pinned back simply, and her blue cotton dress showed the careful mending of someone who knew the value of every thread. At 24, she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the whispers that had followed her from her hometown. The scandal of her broken engagement to banker's son, William Hartford, had spread through St. Louis society like wildfire. When William discovered Sarah worked secretly as a seamstress to help support her widowed mother, he called off their wedding, declaring he couldn't marry someone who worked with her hands like a common laborer. The rejection had crushed more than Sarah's heart. In those days, a broken engagement marked a woman as damaged goods. Mothers pulled their sons away when she passed, and former friends crossed the street to avoid speaking with her. Her mother, Eleanor, had grown sick with worry and shame, spending her days in bed with mysterious ailments that no doctor could cure, but everyone understood came from social embarrassment. Walking down Millbrook's main street, Sarah clutched the address written on a piece of paper. Mrs. Abernathy had advertised for a seamstress and housekeeper in the St. Louis newspaper, promising room and board plus $2 a week for the right woman. The position seemed like salvation, a chance to disappear from society's judging eyes and build a new life where her past couldn't follow. The dusty Rose Saloon sat right in the middle of town, impossible to avoid. Through its bat-wing doors, Sarah could hear the tinkling piano and rough laughter of men who had finished their workday. She quickened her pace, knowing respectable women didn't linger near such establishments, but her tired legs betrayed her. 3 days of train travel had left her exhausted and desperate for rest. Jack Morrison sat on the saloon's wooden porch, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. At 32, he had the lean build of a man who spent his days in the saddle, with sun-darkened skin and pale blue eyes that missed nothing. His brown hair needed cutting, and his clothes carried the honest dirt of ranch work. But there was something different about Jack that set him apart from the typical cowboys who drifted through Millbrook. He had been watching Sarah since she stepped off the train, not in the leering way some men watched women, but with the careful attention of someone who recognized trouble when he saw it. Jack had spent enough years reading cattle and weather and dangerous situations to know when something was about to go wrong. This young woman, walking alone through town with her chin up but her eyes frightened, was heading straight into the kind of trouble that could destroy her. The afternoon crowd at the Dusty Rose was getting louder as the whiskey flowed freely. Ranch hands, railroad workers, and gamblers filled the smoky interior, their voices mixing with the off-key piano music. Behind the bar, Big Tom Patterson wiped glasses with a dirty rag while keeping one eye on his customers. Tom had been running saloons for 20 years, and he could smell trouble brewing like a storm on the horizon. Sarah paused in front of the saloon, consulting her piece of paper again. Mrs. Abernathy's house should be just 2 blocks further, but her legs felt like lead. The weight of her suitcase seemed to double with each step, and the Texas heat pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. She set her bag down for just a moment, trying to gather strength for the final push to her destination. That moment of rest proved to be her undoing. Through the saloon doors stumbled Pete Hawkins, a drifter who had been nursing his whiskey since noon. Pete's bloodshot eyes focused on Sarah with the predatory interest of a man who saw vulnerability as opportunity. He had been listening to the other men talk about the pretty woman who got off the train, and here she was standing right outside like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. Well, Pete slurred, lurching toward Sarah. What do we have here? A little lost lamb, all alone in the big bad world. His breath reeked of cheap whiskey and tobacco, and his unsteady hands reached out toward her. Don't you know nice ladies shouldn't be walking around by themselves? Lucky for you, old Pete here can show you a real good time. Sarah stepped backward, her heart racing with fear. Please, sir, I'm just trying to find Mrs. Abernathy's house. I don't want any trouble. Her voice remained steady despite her terror, but Pete's alcohol-clouded mind heard only what he wanted to hear. Oh, don't be shy now, Pete grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. Come on inside and have a drink with me. I'll buy you something pretty and we can get to know each other real good. He grabbed for her arm. his dirty fingers closing around her wrist with surprising strength. The commotion had drawn attention from inside the saloon. Men pressed against the windows and doorway, some laughing at the entertainment, others placing bets on what would happen next. In frontier towns, a woman's reputation could be destroyed by merely being seen talking to the wrong man. And being dragged into a saloon would mark Sarah as permanently ruined in the eyes of respectable society. Jack Morrison set down his coffee cup and stood slowly. He had seen enough men like Pete Hawkins to know that reasoning wouldn't work. The drifter was past the point where words could reach him, lost in the false courage that came from a bottle. But Jack also knew that sometimes a man had to stand up for what was right, regardless of whether it was his business or not. Sarah struggled against Pete's grip, her suitcase falling to the dusty ground as she tried to break free. "Let me go," she demanded, but her voice was lost in the growing noise from the saloon crowd. Some of the men were calling encouragement to Pete, treating the whole situation like a show put on for their entertainment. The situation was spiraling out of control quickly. In another minute, Pete would succeed in dragging Sarah inside, and once that happened, her reputation would be destroyed forever. Even if she escaped physical harm, no respectable family would hire her, and she would be forced into the kind of life that destroyed women's souls along with their bodies. Jack stepped down from the porch, his boots hitting the dusty street with quiet authority. He didn't say anything yet, but his presence changed the atmosphere like a sudden shift in the wind. The laughing voices from the saloon grew quieter as men recognized the look in Jack's pale blue eyes. This wasn't going to be the easy entertainment they had expected. Jack Morrison moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced down charging bulls and wild horses without flinching. His weathered hands hung loose at his sides, but everyone watching knew he could have his gun drawn faster than most men could blink. The crowd around the saloon doors grew silent, sensing that the afternoon's entertainment was about to take a serious turn. "That's enough, Pete," Jack said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had spent years giving orders that saved lives. "Let the lady go." Pete Hawkins turned, swaying slightly as he tried to focus on this new threat to his fun. Sarah's wrist remained trapped in his grip, but she felt a surge of hope at the sight of her unexpected defender. Jack stood tall and straight, his pale blue eyes fixed on Pete with unwavering intensity. There was something about this cowboy that commanded respect, even from drunken drifters who respected nothing. "This ain't your business, Morrison," Pete slurred, though his grip on Sarah loosened slightly. Even through his whiskey haze, he recognized the danger in Jack's stance. "The lady and me are just getting acquainted. Ain't that right, sweetheart?" He yanked Sarah closer, making her stumble against him. The smell of unwashed bodies and stale alcohol made Sarah's stomach turn, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "I don't know this man, and I asked him to leave me alone. Please, sir," she addressed Jack directly. "I just want to reach Mrs. Abernathy's house." Jack nodded slightly, never taking his eyes off Pete. "You heard the lady. She's not interested in your company. Time to let go and walk away." His tone remained calm, but there was steel underneath that everyone present could hear. From the saloon porch, Big Tom Patterson watched nervously. He knew both men by reputation. Jack Morrison worked for the Double R Ranch and had never caused trouble in town, always paying his tab and treating the saloon girls with more respect than they usually received. Pete Hawkins, on the other hand, was the kind of customer Tom dreaded, loud, mean when drunk, and quick to start fights that ended with broken furniture and unpaid bills. The other men watching began to take sides, some quietly supporting Jack while others encouraged Pete to stand his ground. In frontier towns, backing down from a confrontation could mark a man as weak, and weakness attracted predators like blood attracted wolves. But Jack Morrison had never been accused of weakness by anyone who knew him. "Maybe I don't feel like walking away," Pete said, trying to puff himself up like a rooster in a farmyard. "Maybe I think you should mind your own business and let me have some fun with this pretty little thing." He squeezed Sarah's wrist harder, making her gasp with pain. That small sound of distress changed something in Jack's expression. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his right hand shifted slightly closer to his gun belt. He had been raised by a mother who taught him that protecting women and children was not just a courtesy, but a sacred duty. Any man who caused unnecessary pain to someone weaker deserved whatever consequences followed. "I'm making it my business," Jack said quietly. "Now let her go, Pete. This is your last warning." The tension in the street was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could feel her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She had never been in a situation like this where men might actually fight over her safety. In her sheltered life back in St. Louis, the worst confrontations she had witnessed were sharp words at church social gatherings. Pete's alcohol-fogged brain struggled to process the situation. Part of him wanted to save face in front of the crowd, but another part recognized the very real danger radiating from Jack Morrison. He had seen men like Jack before, quiet, steady types who rarely drew their guns but were deadly accurate when they did. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Pete sneered, though his grip on Sarah's wrist loosened another degree. "This ain't some fairy tale, Morrison. Nice girls don't come to places like this unless they're looking for something. Maybe she wants the attention." Jack's expression darkened at the insult to Sarah's character. In 2 quick steps, he closed the distance between them, moving faster than Pete's whiskey-slowed reflexes could follow. His left hand clamped down on Pete's wrist with iron strength while his right hand rested meaningfully on his gun handle. "The lady is clearly respectable," Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's lost and tired, not looking for trouble. Any fool can see that, which tells me what kind of fool you are." He squeezed Pete's wrist until the drifter yelped and released Sarah completely. Sarah stumbled backward, rubbing her freed wrist where Pete's fingers had left red marks. She looked at Jack with grateful eyes, seeing him clearly for the first time. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years of honest work under the open sky. But it was his eyes that impressed her most, clear blue and direct, holding a strength and kindness that made her feel safe for the first time since leaving St. Louis. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly from the aftermath of fear and relief. Jack nodded briefly in acknowledgement but kept his attention focused on Pete, who was backing away while rubbing his aching wrist. The crowd of onlookers began to disperse, some disappointed that the confrontation hadn't escalated into violence, others relieved that bloodshed had been avoided. "This ain't over, Morrison," Pete muttered, trying to salvage some dignity from his retreat. "A man's got rights in this town." "So does a woman," Jack replied firmly. "Rights to walk down the street without being bothered by drunks who can't take no for an answer. You'd do well to remember that." Pete slunk back into the saloon where his fellow drinkers greeted him with a mixture of mockery and sympathy. Big Tom Patterson shook his head and went back to wiping glasses, already planning to water down Pete's next drink to prevent further trouble. Sarah bent to retrieve her fallen suitcase, her hands still trembling slightly. Jack moved to help her, lifting the worn leather bag with ease. He noticed how light it was and realized that this young woman was traveling with practically nothing, probably carrying everything she owned in the world. "Mrs. Abernathy's place is just up the street," Jack said gently. "I'll walk you there if you don't mind the company. These streets can be tricky for someone new to town." Sarah looked up at him with eyes that held both gratitude and wariness. Her recent experiences had taught her to be cautious about men's motives, even when they appeared helpful. But something about Jack Morrison felt different, solid and trustworthy in a way that had nothing to do with smooth words or false charm. "I would appreciate that very much," she said quietly. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I owe you a debt of gratitude I'm not sure I can ever repay." "Jack Morrison," he replied, touching the brim of his hat politely. "And you don't owe me anything. Any decent man would have done the same thing." As they walked together down the dusty main street, Sarah felt her racing heartbeat begin to slow. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings, and the sounds of the town went on around them. Horses' hooves, children playing, women calling to each other across yard fences. It was the sound of normal life, the kind of peaceful existence Sarah hoped to build for herself in Millbrook. Mrs. Abernathy's house stood at the end of Oak Street, like a beacon of respectability in the rough frontier town. The white picket fence needed fresh paint, and the garden showed signs of an elderly woman's struggle to maintain what had once been her pride and joy. But the porch was swept clean, and lace curtains hung in every window, speaking of a woman who still cared about proper appearances despite her advancing years. Jack carried Sarah's suitcase up the front steps and knocked gently on the door. After several long moments, they heard shuffling footsteps and the sound of multiple locks being turned. The door opened to reveal a tiny woman with silver hair pinned in a neat bun and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. "You must be Sarah Mitchell," Mrs. Abernathy said, looking her up and down with the practiced eye of someone who had been judging character for 73 years. "You're later than I expected. I was beginning to worry the train had been delayed again." "Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry for the delay," Sarah replied, grateful that Jack remained quietly supportive beside her. "I had some difficulty finding the house." Mrs. Abernathy's keen eyes shifted to Jack, taking in his respectful posture and the way he held his hat in his hands. "Jack Morrison, isn't it? You work for old Henderson at the Double R. What brings you to my door?" "Miss Mitchell encountered some trouble near the saloon," Jack explained simply. "I offered to see her safely to your house." He didn't elaborate on the details, understanding that a woman's reputation could be damaged by too much explanation of unsavory encounters. The older woman's expression sharpened with concern and approval in equal measure. She had lived in Millbrook long enough to know what kind of trouble a young woman could face, and she appreciated Jack's discretion in handling the situation. "Well then, I'm grateful to you, Jack. Sarah, come in and get settled. We have much to discuss." Jack set the suitcase inside the door and tipped his hat to both women. "Ladies, I'll bid you good evening. Miss Mitchell, I hope you find Millbrook to your liking." He paused, meeting Sarah's eyes with genuine kindness. "If you ever need anything, the Double R Ranch is about 5 miles north of town. Most folks can give you directions." After Jack left, Mrs. Abernathy led Sarah through a house that spoke of better times. The furniture was good quality but showed wear, and the carpets were faded but clean. In the kitchen, a pot of stew simmered on the stove, filling the air with the comforting smell of home cooking that Sarah hadn't experienced since leaving her mother's house. "Sit down, child," Mrs. Abernathy commanded gently, ladling stew into a bowl and setting it before Sarah along with fresh bread and butter. "You look half-starved. When did you last have a proper meal?" Sarah realized she couldn't remember. The train journey had been a blur of anxiety and determination, with little thought for food or comfort. Now, sitting in this warm kitchen with a kind woman fussing over her, she felt tears threaten for the first time since leaving St. Louis. "Now then," Mrs. Abernathy said, settling into the chair across from Sarah with her own bowl of stew, "tell me about yourself. My advertisement was specific about needing someone with discretion and good character. What brings a young woman like you to a frontier town where she knows nobody?" Sarah had prepared for this question during the long train ride, but sitting across from Mrs. Abernathy's understanding eyes, she found herself telling the truth instead of the carefully constructed story she had rehearsed. She spoke of her broken engagement, the social ostracism that followed, and her mother's illness that came from shame and worry. "I can sew anything," Sarah concluded, her voice stronger now that the confession was over. "I've been doing it since I was 12 years old. I can also cook, clean, manage a household, and keep accurate books. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I need this position desperately. My mother depends on the money I send home." Mrs. Abernathy listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of sympathy. When Sarah finished, the older woman reached across the table and patted her hand gently. "Child, you've done nothing to be ashamed of. Working to support your family is honorable, and any man who thinks otherwise isn't worthy of you anyway." Over the following days, Sarah settled into a routine that felt like salvation after the chaos of her recent life. Mrs. Abernathy had been the postmaster's wife until his death 3 years earlier, and she maintained the kind of household that had been common in her youth, but was increasingly rare in frontier towns. She expected meals served at regular times, clothes mended promptly, and everything kept spotlessly clean. Sarah threw herself into the work with grateful energy. She rose before dawn to start the fires and prepare breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and organizing, and devoted her afternoons to sewing projects that Mrs. Abernathy took in from other townswomen. The older woman had arthritis that made detailed needlework painful, but Sarah's skilled fingers could create beautiful embroidery and delicate alterations that brought in steady income. The sewing work also served another purpose. It established Sarah's reputation in the community as a respectable working woman rather than just another newcomer with a questionable past. The wives of successful businessmen and ranchers began bringing their finest dresses to Mrs. Abernathy's house, knowing that Sarah's work would be exquisite and discreet. 3 weeks after her arrival, Sarah was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard Mrs. Abernathy calling for her. She hurried inside to find the older woman entertaining a visitor in the front parlor. Jack Morrison, looking uncomfortable, perched on the edge of Mrs. Abernathy's delicate sofa, with his hat balanced on his knee. "Sarah, dear, Jack has come with a request," Mrs. Abernathy said, her eyes twinkling with barely concealed amusement. "It seems his boss, Mr. Henderson, needs some sewing done, and Jack remembered your skills." Jack stood when Sarah entered the room, his face slightly flushed with embarrassment. "Miss Mitchell, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. Mr. Henderson's daughter is getting married next month, and the seamstress in the next county took sick. Mrs. Henderson is beside herself, trying to finish the wedding dress and all the other preparations." Sarah felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect of working on a wedding dress, something she had dreamed of doing professionally back in St. Louis. "What kind of work does she need done?" "The dress is mostly finished, but it needs detailed beadwork and some alterations for fit," Jack explained. "Mrs. Henderson heard about your skill from some of the ladies in town. She's willing to pay well for quality work, and she needs it done quickly." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "It would be excellent experience for you, Sarah. The Hendersons are well respected, and their recommendation could lead to more work with the better families in the area." Sarah accepted the commission immediately, grateful for both the income and the opportunity to prove herself further in the community. Jack offered to take her to the Double R Ranch the next morning to meet Mrs. Henderson and examine the dress, an offer that both women accepted as proper and practical. That evening, as Sarah worked by lamplight on some of Mrs. Abernathy's regular mending, the older woman settled into her rocking chair with her knitting. "That Jack Morrison is a good man," she observed casually. "Been working for the Hendersons for 8 years now. Started as a regular cowhand but worked his way up to foreman through honest effort and good judgment." Sarah's hands stilled on her sewing for a moment before resuming their steady rhythm. "He was very kind to help me that first day." "Kind, yes, but also smart," Mrs. Abernathy continued, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. "Takes a man with sense to recognize trouble before it gets out of hand, and the courage to step in when it's not strictly his business. Those are rare qualities in anyone, man or woman." Sarah nodded, thinking about Jack's quiet competence and the way he had handled Pete Hawkins without unnecessary violence or drama. In her sheltered life, she had known men who were either weak and ineffective or loud and domineering. Jack represented something different, strength that didn't need to prove itself and kindness that came from genuine character, rather than social expectation. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah looked out her small window toward the north, where the Double R Ranch lay in the darkness beyond the town. Tomorrow she would see Jack Morrison again, and despite her determination to focus only on building her new life, she found herself looking forward to it more than professional interest could explain. The morning sun painted the Texas landscape in shades of gold and amber as Jack's wagon rolled toward town to collect Sarah. He had borrowed the Hendersons' best buggy for the occasion, complete with cushioned seats and a canvas top to protect his passenger from the harsh sun. The gesture hadn't gone unnoticed by the ranch hands, who teased him mercilessly about his unusual attention to such details. Sarah waited on Mrs. Abernathy's front porch, dressed in her best blue dress with her sewing basket carefully packed beside her. She had spent extra time arranging her hair that morning, telling herself it was merely professional courtesy to look presentable when meeting potential clients. But when she saw Jack approaching with the well-appointed buggy, her heart fluttered in a way that had nothing to do with business. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," Jack said, tipping his hat as he climbed down to help her into the buggy. His hands were gentle but firm as he assisted her up, and Sarah caught herself noticing the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The ride to the Double R Ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Sarah had ever seen. Rolling hills covered in prairie grass stretched to the horizon, broken by occasional groves of oak trees, and the silver ribbon of a creek that wound through the landscape like nature's own embroidery thread. Cattle dotted the pastures, their bells creating a peaceful melody that mixed with the sound of the buggy wheels and Jack's horse's steady hoofbeats. "It's magnificent," Sarah breathed, forgetting to maintain proper reserve in her wonder at the scenery. "I never imagined Texas would be so beautiful. Back in St. Louis, people talked about it like it was nothing but desert and danger." Jack smiled at her enthusiasm, pleased to see her relaxed and happy after the worried tension she had carried since arriving in Millbrook. "Most folks who talk about places have never actually been there," he observed. This land gets into your blood if you give it a chance. There's something about all this space and freedom that changes a person. They talked easily as they traveled, sharing observations about the landscape and the wildlife they spotted along the way. Jack pointed out different types of birds and explained the seasonal patterns of the ranch work, while Sarah described her life in St. Louis and her amazement at how different everything felt in Texas. Neither mentioned the awkwardness of their first meeting or speculated about Sarah's future plans, but both felt the comfortable companionship growing between them. The Double R Ranch House was a sprawling structure that had grown organically over the years as the Henderson family prospered. What had started as a simple cabin now boasted 2 stories, a wraparound porch, and several additions that spoke of success and stability. Gardens surrounded the house, carefully tended and thriving despite the challenging climate. Mrs. Henderson met them at the door, a plump woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that immediately assessed Sarah with approval. "You must be the young woman Jack told us about. I'm Martha Henderson, and I can't tell you how grateful I am for your help. Come in, and let me show you what we're dealing with." The wedding dress hung in Martha's sewing room like a cloud of ivory silk and lace. It was beautiful work, clearly expensive and well designed, but Sarah could see immediately where problems had developed. The seamstress who had begun the work was skilled but had apparently fallen ill before completing the intricate beadwork that would transform the dress from merely pretty to truly spectacular. "Daughter Rebecca is about your size," Martha explained, wringing her hands with maternal anxiety. "The wedding is in 3 weeks, and I've been losing sleep trying to figure out how to finish this properly." The original seamstress did beautiful work, but the beading pattern she started is more complex than I can manage with my eyesight. Sarah examined the dress carefully, running her experienced fingers over the partially completed beadwork. The pattern was indeed intricate, requiring perfect spacing and precise stitching to create the flowing floral design that would cascade down the skirt and train. But it was exactly the kind of challenge that Sarah loved, the type of detailed work that allowed her skills to truly shine. "I can finish this," Sarah said confidently, already visualizing the completed design. "The original seamstress chose a beautiful pattern, and I can match her technique exactly. With steady work, I can have it ready with time to spare for final fittings." Martha's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Oh, bless you, dear. Rebecca will be so pleased. She's been worried sick about the dress, and a bride shouldn't have to worry about such things so close to her wedding day." Jack had been standing quietly in the doorway, watching Sarah work. He found himself impressed not just by her obvious skill, but by her confidence and professionalism. She handled the expensive dress like it was precious art, which in many ways it was, and her enthusiasm for the project was infectious. "Miss Mitchell," Martha said, suddenly struck by inspiration, "would you consider staying here at the ranch while you work on the dress? We have a lovely guest room, and it would be so much easier than traveling back and forth to town every day." "I could pay you extra for the inconvenience." Sarah glanced at Jack, who nodded slightly in encouragement. The practical part of her mind recognized the efficiency of the arrangement, while another part looked forward to spending more time in Jack's company, even if propriety would limit their interaction. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Henderson. I would need to discuss it with Mrs. Abernathy, but if she approves, I think it would work beautifully." The arrangement was quickly settled. Mrs. Abernathy not only approved but seemed secretly delighted by the development, suggesting that Sarah pack enough belongings for an extended stay since wedding. Preparations often required last-minute adjustments and additional work. Sarah's first evening at the Double R Ranch revealed a way of life she had only heard about in stories. The Henderson family gathered for dinner around a long table that could seat 20 people during busy seasons. Tonight it was just the family, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, their daughter Rebecca and their son Tom, along with Jack, who was clearly treated more like family than an employee. Rebecca Henderson was a lovely girl of 19 with her mother's kind eyes and her father's determined chin. She welcomed Sarah warmly and insisted on showing her every detail of the wedding preparations, from the church decorations to the menu for the reception. Her happiness was infectious, and Sarah found herself caught up in the excitement of the approaching celebration. "I can't believe you can really finish the beadwork," Rebecca said as they examined the dress together after dinner. "When Mrs. Caldwell took sick, I thought I might have to wear my mother's old wedding dress, which is beautiful but doesn't fit me at all. The beadwork will be exquisite when it's finished, Sarah assured her. The pattern your original seamstress chose is perfect for the style of the dress. You're going to look absolutely beautiful. Later that evening, Sarah sat on the ranch house porch enjoying the cool night air and the spectacular display of stars that city living had hidden from her view. The sounds of the ranch settling down for the night created a peaceful symphony. Horses nickering in the corral, the distant lowing of cattle, and the soft murmur of conversation from the bunkhouse where the ranch hands were ending their day. Jack emerged from the main house carrying 2 cups of coffee, offering one to Sarah before settling into the chair beside her. Peaceful out here, he observed, following her gaze up to the star-filled sky. More peaceful than I ever imagined possible, Sarah agreed, accepting the coffee gratefully. In St. Louis there was always noise. Carriages, factory whistles, people shouting. Here the quiet feels like a gift. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Jack spoke quietly. Can I ask you something, Miss Mitchell? You don't have to answer if it's too personal. Sarah tensed slightly, but his tone was gentle and respectful rather than prying. What would you like to know? Do you ever think about staying? In Millbrook, I mean, making a permanent life here instead of just working until you can afford to go somewhere else. The question touched on thoughts Sarah had been avoiding, dreams that felt too fragile to examine too closely. I don't know, she answered honestly. This is all so different from what I planned. A month ago, I thought my future was completely ruined. Now working on Rebecca's dress, sitting here under these stars, it feels like maybe there are possibilities I never considered before. Jack nodded, understanding more than she realized. Sometimes life takes us places we never expected to go. The trick is recognizing when those unexpected places might actually be exactly where we belong. The days at the Double R Ranch fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Sarah rose with the sun each morning, taking her coffee on the porch while watching Jack and the ranch hands begin their daily work with the cattle. She had never realized how much coordination and skill went into managing a successful ranch, or how the work changed with the seasons and weather patterns that city dwellers never had to consider. Her own work on Rebecca's wedding dress progressed beautifully. Each evening, she would spread the gown carefully on the large table in Martha Henderson's sewing room and work by lamplight on the intricate beadwork. The pattern was coming to life under her skilled fingers, transforming the dress into something truly spectacular that would make Rebecca feel like a princess on her wedding day. Jack began finding excuses to spend time near the house during his work breaks. Sometimes he would repair a loose porch rail or oil a squeaky door hinge, tasks that the regular maintenance crew could have handled, but that he claimed needed his personal attention. Martha Henderson watched these developments with knowing smiles, remembering her own courtship days when her future husband had found similar urgent needs to be wherever she was working. That's beautiful work, Jack said one evening, appearing in the doorway of the sewing room where Sarah sat hunched over the dress. She had been working for hours, completely absorbed in creating perfect tiny flowers from hundreds of seed pearls and silver thread. Sarah looked up, blinking as her eyes adjusted from the close work. Thank you. I think Rebecca will be pleased with how it's turning out. She gestured to the section she had completed that day, where delicate beaded roses seemed to bloom across the ivory silk. May I? Jack asked, indicating the chair across from her workspace. When Sarah nodded, he settled himself carefully, mindful not to disturb any of the materials spread across the table. I've been watching you work when I pass by the window. You have a gift that goes beyond just knowing how to sew. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Back in St. Louis, her needlework had been dismissed as mere woman's work, suitable only for passing time until marriage. Here Jack spoke of it with genuine respect and admiration. My grandmother taught me when I was very young. She said that putting love into your stitches was what made the difference between work and art. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. She died when I was 15, but I still hear her voice sometimes when I'm working on something special. Sarah's fingers traced one of the completed beaded flowers. She would have loved working on a wedding dress. She always said that sewing for a bride brought extra blessings. Jack leaned forward slightly, his eyes intent on Sarah's face. What other things did she teach you? The question opened a door to memories Sarah rarely shared. She found herself telling Jack about her grandmother's stories of the old country, the recipes passed down through generations, and the practical wisdom about life and love that had shaped Sarah's character. Jack listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own memories of the grandfather who had taught him about horses and cattle. Their conversation was interrupted by Rebecca bursting into the room, her face glowing with excitement. "Sarah, you have to see what Tom brought back from town. There's news about the railroad bringing a spur line through Millbrook. Father says it could mean real prosperity for the whole area." The news was indeed significant. A railroad spur would mean easier transportation for cattle and goods, bringing economic growth that would benefit everyone in the county. But for Sarah, it also represented something more personal, confirmation that Millbrook was a place with a future, not just a temporary refuge from her past troubles. Over the following days, the wedding preparations intensified. Sarah finished the beadwork on the dress and began the delicate process of final fittings. Rebecca proved to be an ideal client, patient with the multiple adjustments needed to achieve perfection and genuinely appreciative of Sarah's artistic vision. "I feel like a fairy tale princess," Rebecca sighed, standing on the fitting stool while Sarah pinned the hem to precisely the right length. "James won't believe his eyes when he sees me walking down the aisle." Martha Henderson watched from her chair by the window, tears of joy in her eyes. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart." "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. This dress is more beautiful than anything we could have hoped for." The praise meant more to Sarah than she could express. For the first time since her broken engagement, she felt valued for her skills and appreciated for who she was rather than judged for what had happened to her. The work had restored her confidence and given her a sense of purpose that she had thought was lost forever. 3 days before the wedding, Jack asked Sarah to take a walk with him after dinner. They strolled through Martha's garden where late summer flowers bloomed in profusion despite the challenging climate. The air was soft and warm, filled with the scent of roses and the sound of crickets beginning their evening chorus. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," Jack began, his voice slightly nervous. "About possibilities you never considered before. I wonder if you might consider one more possibility." Sarah's heart began to beat faster, sensing the serious tone in his voice. "What kind of possibility?" Jack stopped walking and turned to face her, his pale blue eyes reflecting the last light of the setting sun. "The possibility of staying here permanently. Not just in Millbrook, but here on the ranch. With me." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with hope and uncertainty. Sarah felt her breath catch as she realized what Jack was suggesting. "Jack, I know it's sudden," he continued quickly. "And I know you have reasons to be cautious about trusting men after what happened to you back in St. Louis. But I've been watching you these past weeks, seeing how you fit into life here, how happy you seem when you're working on something you love. I think we could build something good together." Sarah looked around the garden, at the ranch house where warm light spilled from the windows, at the vast Texas sky that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Everything about this place felt like home in a way that her life in St. Louis never had, even before her world fell apart. "What exactly are you asking me, Jack?" "I'm asking you to marry me," he said simply. "I'm asking you to be my wife and make this ranch your home. I'm asking you to trust me with your heart and let me prove that not all men are like the one who hurt you." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "You barely know me. How can you be sure we would suit each other?" Jack smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly at her tone. "I know that you're kind and brave and talented. I know that you work hard and care about doing things right. I know that you make me want to be a better man than I ever thought I could be. And I know that when I think about my future, I can't imagine it without you in it." The honesty in his voice touched something deep in Sarah's heart. After the betrayal and rejection she had experienced, Jack's straightforward sincerity felt like a healing balm. "I care about you too," she admitted softly. "More than I thought I could care about anyone again. But marriage is such a big step." "We don't have to decide everything tonight," Jack said gently. "But I wanted you to know how I feel, and I wanted you to think about the possibility. You found a place here, Sarah. People respect your work and value your skills. Mrs. Abernathy adores you. Martha thinks of you like a daughter. And Rebecca wants you to make her wedding dress into a business venture that could support you for years to come." Sarah's mind raced with the implications of what Jack was suggesting. A life on this ranch, surrounded by people who had already welcomed her as family. Work that challenged and fulfilled her, and Jack himself strong and gentle and completely different from any man she had ever known. "Can I have some time to think about it?" she asked finally. "All the time you need," Jack assured her. "But Sarah, know this. Whatever happened to you before, whatever anyone else made you believe about yourself, you deserve to be happy. You deserve to be loved for exactly who you are." As they walked back to the house together, Sarah felt something shift inside her heart. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with hope instead of just survival. The possibility of love, real and lasting, bloomed in her chest like the beaded flowers she had so carefully created on Rebecca's wedding dress. Rebecca Henderson's wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers across the prairie. Sarah rose before sunrise to make final preparations on the dress, checking every bead and ensuring that every detail was perfect. As she carefully arranged the gown in its protective wrapping for transport to the church, she felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond professional pride. The small wooden church in Millbrook had been decorated with late summer flowers and white ribbons that fluttered in the morning breeze. Half the county had turned out for the celebration, filling the pews with ranchers, townspeople, and ranch hands all dressed in their finest clothes. Sarah sat with Mrs. Abernathy in the third row, wearing her best dress and feeling like she truly belonged in this community for the first time since arriving in Texas. When Rebecca appeared at the back of the church, a collective gasp of admiration rippled through the congregation. The beaded wedding dress caught the light streaming through the windows, creating sparkles that danced like captured starlight across the ivory silk. Rebecca glowed with happiness as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and Sarah felt tears of joy spring to her eyes at the sight of her work bringing such beauty to this special moment. Jack, serving as one of James's groomsmen, caught Sarah's eye from his position at the altar and smiled warmly. The look that passed between them held promises and possibilities that made Sarah's heart flutter with anticipation. She had spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about his proposal, weighing her fears against her growing feelings, and she finally knew what her answer would be. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the Double R Ranch, where Martha Henderson had prepared a feast that would be talked about for years to come. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and pies made from every fruit that grew in the county. Musicians from town provided dancing music, and the party continued long into the evening under strings of lanterns that turned the ranch yard into a magical wonderland. "Sarah." "Dear, I can't thank you enough," Rebecca said, finding Sarah during a quiet moment between dances. The new Mrs. James Crawford looked radiant in her beaded gown, every inch the fairy tale bride she had dreamed of being. "Every woman here has asked about my dress. I think you're going to have more work than you can handle." It was true. Throughout the evening, Sarah had been approached by ranchers' wives and daughters wanting to discuss commissions for everything from everyday dresses to formal gowns for special occasions. The success of Rebecca's dress had established her reputation as an artist, rather than just a seamstress, opening doors to the kind of career she had only dreamed of back in St. Louis. Mrs. Henderson appeared beside them, slightly flushed from dancing but beaming with maternal pride. "Sarah, I have a proposition for you. Several of the ladies have been asking about your work, and I think there's a real opportunity here. What would you say to opening a proper dressmaking shop in town? I could help you get started, and with your skills and Rebecca's dress as advertisement, I believe you could build a thriving business." The offer was tempting and practical, representing financial independence and creative fulfillment. But as Sarah considered it, she found herself looking across the yard to where Jack stood talking with a group of ranchers, his face animated as he discussed something about cattle prices and railroad schedules. The sight of him filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with business opportunities and everything to do with the future she was beginning to envision. "That's very generous of you." "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah replied carefully, "could I have a little time to think about all the details?" "Of course, dear. There's no rush, but I wanted you to know that the opportunity is there if you want it." As the evening wound down and guests began to make their way home, Sarah found herself alone on the porch where she had spent so many peaceful evenings during her stay at the ranch. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the sounds of the party gave way to the familiar night music of the prairie. Cattle, lowing in the distance, horses moving restlessly in their corral, and the whisper of wind through the grass. Jack appeared beside her, having shed his formal jacket and tie in favor of his more comfortable everyday clothes. "Beautiful wedding," he said, settling into the chair next to hers. Rebecca looked like she stepped out of a dream. She did, didn't she? Sarah agreed, still glowing with pride at the success of her work. "I've never seen a bride look happier." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in thoughts about the day's events and what they meant for the future. Finally, Jack turned to face Sarah, his expression serious but hopeful. "Have you given any more thought to what we talked about the other night?" he asked gently. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change the course of her life forever. "I have, actually. I've thought about very little else, man." Jack's voice was carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders as he waited for her answer. "I keep thinking about what you said about deserving to be happy." Sarah began slowly. "For so long, I believed that happiness was something that happened to other people, not something I could choose for myself. But being here, working on Rebecca's dress, getting to know your friends and neighbors, spending time with you, I've started to believe that maybe I do deserve good things after all." Jack leaned forward slightly, hope beginning to show in his eyes. "Does that mean—" "It means yes," Sarah said simply, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jack Morrison. Yes, I want to make this ranch my home. Yes, I want to build a life with you." The smile that spread across Jack's face was brighter than all the lanterns in the yard. He reached for her hands, holding them gently as if they were precious treasures. "Are you sure? I know it's a big decision, and I want you to be certain." "I'm sure," Sarah said, surprised by how confident she felt now that the decision was made. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You've shown me what it means to be truly respected and valued. You've given me a place where I belong and work that fulfills me. Most importantly, you've taught me to trust again." Jack brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I promise you won't regret it. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you're happy and safe and loved." "I know you will," Sarah whispered, feeling tears of joy slip down her cheeks. "When do you think we should have the wedding?" "How about next month?" Jack suggested, his eyes twinkling with happiness. "That will give us time to plan properly, and it will be after the fall roundup when things are calmer on the ranch." Sarah laughed, imagining herself walking down the aisle of the little church in Millbrook, surrounded by the community that had welcomed her with open arms. "I'll need to design my own dress. Something simple but elegant, suitable for a ranch wife." "Whatever you want," Jack agreed. "Though I have to say you could wear a flour sack and still be the most beautiful bride in Texas." The compliment made Sarah blush, but it also filled her with a confidence she had thought was lost forever. In Jack's eyes, she saw herself as she truly was. Not the damaged goods her former fiancé had made her feel like, but a woman worthy of love and respect and a bright future. Over the following weeks, news of their engagement spread through the county like wildfire. Mrs. Abernathy declared herself delighted but not surprised, claiming she had seen it coming from the day Jack first carried Sarah's suitcase to her door. Martha Henderson immediately began planning an engagement party, insisting that the community needed another excuse to celebrate. The dressmaking opportunities that had emerged from Rebecca's wedding began to materialize into real commissions. Sarah found herself busier than she had ever been, creating everything from everyday dresses to elaborate ball gowns for the wives and daughters of successful ranchers. The work was challenging and rewarding, allowing her to support herself while building toward her future with Jack. One evening, as she sat sewing by lamplight in Mrs. Abernathy's parlor, a letter arrived from her mother in St. Louis. Eleanor Mitchell had written to say that she was feeling much better and that the money Sarah had been sending had helped immensely with household expenses. More importantly, she had heard about Sarah's engagement through mutual acquaintances and wanted to express her joy at her daughter's happiness. "I always knew you were meant for something special," Eleanor had written in her careful script. "Perhaps leaving St. Louis was the best thing that could have happened to you. From your letters, it sounds like you found not just a new home but a new life that truly suits you. I couldn't be prouder of the strong, independent woman you've become." Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in her jewelry box alongside the ring Jack had given her, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. Both represented connections to the past that strengthened rather than burdened her future. As autumn painted the Texas landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah Mitchell prepared to become Sarah Morrison. She had found safety in the arms of a cowboy who declared that no man had the right to harm her. But more than that, she had found love, purpose, and a place where she truly belonged.